The Chiefs are going to win the Super Bowl next
again. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Two of Joseph Smith's major prophecies were the Civil War prophecy and baptism for the dead. Of course, the Community of Christ doesn't hold those as high as esteem as the LDS Church does. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of these differences with former church historian from the Community of Christ, Dr. Mark Scherer. He's written a 3-volume work called Journey of a People, kind of like the Saints volumes for the LDS Church. In Volume 1, we're going to talk about the origins that are common to both LDS and RLDS churches. So you won't want to miss this conversation. Check it out. I love this early time frame. We haven't talked about it for a while. I've seen some critics of Mormonism that look at the revelation on the Civil War. It happened Christmas Day, 1832, where Joseph prophesied there would be war, and it would probably start in South Carolina.
Yes.
A lot of people have said, well, there was kind of a nullification crisis in 1832. It was in the news. That's not really a good prophecy. Mm-hmm. I will say that when the Civil War did break out, William Bickerton was very proud of that prophecy and believed it.
Yes.
Do you have an opinion on, I don't remember what section that is, but the one that deals with the Civil War prophecy?
Yes, I do have an opinion on that.
Okay.
Just let's wait for Father Time here. My opinion is that the Civil War prophecy is a good example of Joseph Smith, his perception of the times, and he's not the first to make that declaration. One of several. To be perfectly frank, I didn't really spend a lot of time on the Civil War prophecy in my book, simply because I don't think that it added a lot to the understanding of Joseph Smith Jr. from what I had already explained about how he is a product of his times, and that he would give a so-called prophecy about the coming of the Civil War. Oh my goodness. You could see that, you could see it coming down the road, all the way from the Nat Turner Rebellion, Amistad, if you've seen the movie, that's 1839. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, you capture the sense that people are understanding that there are awful times ahead, and and John Caldwell Calhoun is spouting it off as early as 1828. He is threatening people with his articles in the South Carolina protest and I can't remember the name of the newspaper, but it's part of the milieu. I keep using that term, milieu. It's part of the times. So it makes perfect sense when Joseph Smith makes this as a statement, and that you have canonized it in your Doctrine and Covenants, and that we have not.
You've never canonized it?
No.
Oh, interesting.
We would never canonize that. No. That's not in our Doctrine.
I didn't realize that.
No.
William Bickerton thought a lot of it. I guess they didn't canonize
Sidney
it
Rigdon, that's, go for it. High five.
Interesting. I know another fairly big difference between our two churches.
Sure.
Is the 1836 vision of Elijah.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
And that in the LDS Church is a huge vision, kind of was the founding vision of redeeming the dead. Elijah brought the sealing keys and that sort of a thing.
Yes.
I mean, there were other events too, but not just baptism for the dead, but of course polygamy as well, sealing that way. And how And I know the Community of Christ has a different view of that vision. How do you characterize that vision?
Oh, yes. Okay. So let's call a spade. Okay. Baptism for the dead. Okay. It is such an integral part of the LDS faith. It was also for us. Joseph Smith III, there are articles in our early, we believed in baptism for the dead from 1860 at the establishment of our church, all the way up to 1865. The May.
Did you mean 1965 or
1865?
So just the Civil War period, basically.
Yes, at the conclusion of the Civil War, our what we would call a joint council, it would be the council of the 12 plus the presidency, and there were only 2 members of the presidency at the time. But anyway, the point being, the baptism for the dead is written in the verified as a belief of the church, of the reorganization. Now, this is my side. This is me.
Right.
As early as of those opening years, all the way up. But it was not considered. Joseph III had a wonderful way to calm the waters on controversial issues, because half of the joint council favored it, half the joint council said no. So what does Joseph Smith Jr. the third compromise? He says, okay, we will continue to believe it. However, a person's it will not be held as a tenet of that a person must believe in order to be a member of the church. In other words, he was giving free rein for a person to say yes or no based on the baptism for the dead. Now, to give you an idea of how important baptism for the dead was, Joseph III had a brother by the name of Alexander Hale Smith, right? Younger brother, okay? When the reorganization began, okay, Alexander Hale Smith was not sold. As a matter of fact, only Emma and David Hiram believed in the reorganization, that the church should believed in, that Joseph Smith III should embrace the view of the new organization that eventually became their organization. Alexander Hale said, absolutely not. I'm not going to be part of any of this. This is important because Alexander Hale Smith eventually would be presiding patriarch. He would be closest advisor in their reorganization. Well, what caused that separation? What caused him to embrace? It was his brother Frederick. Fred had not been baptized, you see. He had died. And which means that according to church beliefs, he could not join in the spiritual family in the cosmos, right? If he had not been baptized. Mm-hmm. Well, Joseph III had to assure Alexander that Fred would be baptized for the dead, which would enable him to be with the Smith family in the afterlife. Okay, now that really is those who watch this, that is a rather paltry abbreviation of a very complex issue. But having said that, it was baptism for the dead that convinced Alexander Hale that Joseph III's movement was viable. And so he joined the movement. That was 1863. I mean, the movement had already been fairly well established. So baptism for the dead is very important. Eventually, oh man, there's incredible stories about baptism. Am I taking too much time?
No. This is what we're all about.
Oh gosh. Okay, so baptism for the dead becomes a real hot topic out in the field. not at headquarters. Pretty much resolved at headquarters.
Headquarters was in Lamoni at the time?
No, not yet. Not
Okay.
yet. This is still in Plano, Illinois.
Okay.
Okay. They're soon to go to Lamoni, but this is in Plano, Illinois. Out there in the field, there and baptism for the dead. Well, Joseph III made a statement that got us problems today.
Oh.
He said, "Oh yeah, he said, there shall be no more baptisms for the dead until the temple is built in Zion."
You've got one now.
Yeah. Duh. You bet we do. So when the temple was, when W. Wallace Smith, that would have been what? The grandson
of Joseph III.
The prophet, W. Wallace Smith, gave inclination that it came time, in 1968, came time for us to start preparing for the construction of, of the temple.
This is volume 3.
Volume 3.
We're jumping ahead.
Jumping way ahead. The letters came flooding into W. Wallace's mailbox.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what they were asking about?
Baptism for
the dead. Because after all, it's what your father said. That's just what your father said when the temple is built in Zion. So I've been in the archives in the W. Wallace Smith papers, and I mean they're thick. They're thick.
Well, that's
files.
right. His father was Joseph III. I forgot.
Right,
I guess I said that wrong. It was his father. Not
so it'd be the grandson.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of Joseph,
the prophet, Joseph Smith,
right,
Jr. Okay, so Joseph W. Wallace had to write in our church journal called the Herald, Saints Herald,
mm-hmm.
An encyclical, if you're Catholic, an encyclical that said there will be no baptism for the dead now, associated with the temple, now or in the future. So he just absolutely cut it off. It was far too out of the mainstream of how the community of reorganization / community of Christ understood its story as well as its theology. So there is no baptism for the dead. However,
and you soon moved it out of your Doctrine and Covenants, right?
Yes, that's true. We had a yes.
It went to the appendix and then it cut out of there.
Yeah, in 1970, there were a series of revelations removed to a historical appendix. Okay, you know the story. Okay,
I do, but my listeners might not. So keep
okay.
Going.
Yes. And this says something about Community of Christ reorganization. Okay. There was an argument on the World Conference floor. Okay.
Now I understand that a lot better.
Yeah, big argument among delegates. Community of Christ reorganization.
We're going to have to do a history of World Conference.
There's no right arm, no right elbow, no right arm to the square. I mean, I wouldn't say it as a dog fight. I wouldn't say that. It's not a food fight, but people are free to express their opinion. And in many cases, it's emotional opinion.
We're going to have a segment on World Conference too.
Okay. So in 1970, they had a real argument going back and forth, compromise. The fear was you're going to take it out of the Doctrine and Covenants. Oh my goodness, it's a revelation. Oh my, can't do that. So the decision was, okay, we're going to leave it in the Doctrine and Covenants, but we're going to create what's called a historical appendix, which is the historic. It's not the literal church theological beliefs, but it's there. Mm-hmm. So both sides were mollified.
So it's a kind of a step down from Scripture. It's a demotion. Wouldn't you say that? It's a demotion from canonization.
Yes, that's correct. It would be. It's a demotion from canonization to acknowledge it as a topic of history, and to recognize its important role It stayed between the covers of the book of the Doctrine and Covenants. Okay, for 20 years it stayed that way until 1990, when in 1990 the World Conference again. There's some Nigerian delegates couldn't understand how you could have a book of Scripture, Doctrine and Covenants, and not have what's inside of Scripture. I mean, it makes no sense. So they came to a matter of vote, and so they performed what I refer to as a scriptural appendectomy. They removed the appendix, the historical appendix,
because that wasn't the only thing that was in there, right? There
were like 5 or 6 revelations. Yes, some of the revelations were, more meetings of business meetings that the saints at the time felt merited inclusion in the Doctrine and Covenants, and so by vote, it's the members, it's in conference assembled determined at the recommendation of the first presidency of the prophet. They decide what's in the Doctrine and Covenants. Boom, it goes in, or we now know in 1990 it comes out. I mean, literally comes out. So today's Doctrine and Covenants does not have anything, for example, on baptism for the dead in today's. Now, it's a matter of church history, of course, but not a matter of canonized belief.
Yeah. So was this visit of Elijah a big deal to the community of Christ then?
I get myself in trouble when I try to project my understanding of church belief, of what the church, per se, what the church at large believes. One of the geniuses, though, of what Joseph III initiated is that we are not a dogmatic faith, a dogmatic denomination.
Well, his father was like that too, right?
Yes, that is true. Except if you were if you were a member of the 3 witnesses of the Book of Mormon, if you were 9 of the original 12 members of the Council of 12, a lot of people.
Were 9 of them excommunicated?
I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's about right.
Wow.
Again, Michael Marquardt's written a wonderful book on the lost apostles.
Right.
I
have it, and I read part of it, but I haven't finished it.
Wonderful book. It really informed me. So it's quick to say, as Joseph Smith Jr., we are non-dogmatic. By that, it's a curious reference. Is there a belief within the church? There's no beliefs in our church today that require, and I mean require, embracing in order to retain your membership. That's by dogmatism, by dogmatic. That's the way we believe what it means to be a dogmatic church. In other words, is your baptism dependent upon your belief in a certain tenet? And there isn't. There isn't that viewpoint. Now, if you don't believe in God,
can you be an atheist?
That doesn't mean you can't. I mean, if you don't believe in God, it would be difficult to be a member of the community of Christ. I mean, but if you want to remove yourself, that's up to you, not us.
Okay.
You can certainly lose your membership at your own initiation, not at ours. If you didn't believe in the Bible, I mean, one would have to ask themselves, why be a member of a Bible-believing denomination? I mean, now that's just there's nothing within the reorganization stroke community of Christ that requires a belief in order to receive the hand of fellowship. How about that?
Okay. I'm sure I could keep going there.
Fascinating? Is that odd? Does that seem odd?
Oh, for LDS, yeah. You
I can imagine
certain things.
I can imagine.
Well, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead to 1984 because we're going to get there eventually. But I think that was a big deal. But I want to stick back and we'll maybe finish up book 1 a little bit here before we move on to book 2. Polygamy.
Yes.
So for basically 100 years, your church said Joseph didn't practice polygamy.
Yes.
My church said he did.
Yes.
Brigham Young went through that. I remember, gosh, how long has it been? I remember President Veazey, I bet it's been 15 years. I think he's been in 20, I think, where he said, it looks like Joseph practiced polygamy.
Well, yeah.
And and I don't know if I should ask that question.
No, go ahead.
But I will, because this is kind of a big thing. I was talking to a member of the Community of Christ. He's passed away. But one of the things he said was the Community of Christ pretty much jettisoned a lot of the Nauvoo doctrines, which would include polygamy, would include King Follett's sermon, progression of gods. You guys are kind of fuzzy on DNC 76. I think it's still canonized with the 3 degrees of glory.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like a lot of people don't really believe that.
It's still there. Okay. You bet.
It's probably de-emphasized quite a bit, though.
Yeah.
So, and of course, but polygamy, I guess, is the big Nauvoo doctrine. It's the explosive one.
You bet.
And so I know a lot of LDS are like, nah, you finally came around to our side. And it's funny to me, and I don't know if it's an influx. I've been trying to figure out, but it seems like there are a lot of people in my church now that are like, Joseph didn't practice polygamy. And we're like, you must be former RLDS. I don't know. I know some of them are LDS lifelong.
Sure.
I don't understand why that's coming back, because it's like, and I will often point and say, look, Community of Christ even acknowledges it, and they quit for 100 years. They said he didn't. But can you address that issue of Joseph's polygamy and how you deal with it as a historian?
Sure. Let me take you back to January of 1879. Okay. 1879. Emma was born 1804. She's very up in years, very fragile, very frail. There was a fear that she was going to pass. Now, she didn't pass until April, but this is January. So Joseph III in Nauvoo contacted Alexander, and I think Alexander was in Plano at the time. He said, look, if you want to see your mother alive, you better get in a train, get here, so many words. So they did. And so the 2 brothers, Joseph III and Alexander Hale, interviewed Emma.
It was a famous interview.
That's right. And Alexander Hale, we've got the notes. I mean, they're wonderful notes. Did the scribing while Joseph III did the interrogation. Okay. And one of the questions was asked, did Dad, if I can use that term informally, engage in politics, or in polygamy, in so many words? That's he spoke differently, the words, but that's the gist of the question.
Spiritual wifery, basically.
Spiritual wifery, yeah. So you know the story then.
I do.
Because that was the language they used. Okay.
It seems to be a big controversy in my church, and I don't understand why.
It shouldn't be a big controversy. If you understand the context of the times, then you understand why Emma denied she denied any involvement of Joseph Jr. with spiritual wifery. Next question was, well, did Dad have any improper relations with any of his wives, or absolutely, absolutely not. I was the only wife of your father. Okay, she varied the language a little bit on that, but she wanted to communicate that she was the only wife, and all these others couldn't be because she was the only wife. Well, Valley and Avery and Linda King Newell have done a wonderful work on Emma Hale Smith.
Linda just passed away, sadly.
So it's really, it impressed me, okay? And I attributed some of my interpretation to them. So I extended the argument more than they did to a certain extent. Emma stood by her man, okay? Tammy Wynette.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, stand by your man. Okay, this was Emma, Victorian wife and mother through and through, who come Hades or high water, going to protect the name of her husband. Okay. Secondly, she understood what would happen to this reorganization. This reorganization now.
Mm-hmm.
The reorganization, should she turn around and say, "Oh yes, your dad was definitely married to numerous women," it would have devastated the movement, absolutely destroyed the movement, because it was in large part based on the I'm not going to use apathetic. Okay, it's based on the idea that they're not LDS Mormons. And if you turn around and say that Joseph Smith was a polygamist, now you are turning the reorganization into Mormons. And that was antithetical to everything that church members believed. So she's not going to tell her sons that, yes, your dad was a polygamist, even though she observed the way. I guess what I'm saying is she's out to protect. She understands the implications of her answer. And so she's going to, go to her deathbed weeks later, telling her sons that, no, your dad was not a polygamist, as it were. Now, there were those like Ebenezer Robinson who joined the reorganization. Angelina and Ebenezer joined the reorganization temporarily. Ebenezer was, of course, one of the editors of the Nauvoo newspapers and so on.
Mm-hmm.
He testified, authenticated, that Hiram came to them and explained that this is what had to happen.
And then she threw it in the fire, right?
Well, no, that was a revelation.
Yeah.
That was a revelation. That wasn't Ebenezer Robinson. This is Hiram going to Ebenezer and Angelina Robinson, saying, "Look, here's what you must do." Well, the Robinson, Eb is they call him Eb. They walked. They left. They left the church because of this belief. Well, now.
So Ebenezer Robinson left the church because he didn't believe in polygamy? Is that what you're saying?
In part, yes. Yeah. They didn't go west with Brigham. They were among hundreds and hundreds who left the church. So when Joseph III launched the reorganization, the Robinsons embraced it, but for many reasons, but not only because Joseph III was the seed of Joseph, but because also he believed that Joseph, the issue boiled down to polygamy, but the problem is that Ebenezer and Angelina, they got a problem because they were taught by Hiram Smith. So after several articles of Joseph III in the Saints Herald saying no, Dad was not a polygamist, Eb said, "I've had enough." So he went to Joseph III and said, "Look, you can't write that because we were there. He was in our living room telling us this is what has to happen.
Hiram.
You're right. Hiram did, and Angelina's nodding her head. Yeah. And so they took a walk. They knew good and well. There are all kinds of evidences that Joseph Smith III, or Joseph Smith Jr., was a polygamist. Now, the problem comes with my folks who, like me, had been cut their historical eye teeth on writings completely in denial, when the modern scholarship proves beyond really any doubt. No, I shouldn't say that.
I know a lot of people that doubt it.
Yeah, I'm in trouble here because the camera's running. There is a. I tell you what. I'll use Steve. Okay, there is a preponderance of evidence. How about that? Is that would that work? Okay,
fine with me. I would say beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes, yes, and I think, but again, Rick, this is just one of these issues that was important to earlier generations. We've had our battles over it. We've had those who have left our church in droves because of it. And it anymore today, it's a moot point, more of not amusement, but kind of ho-hum. When my first book came out, I laid it out. I laid the arguments out, and I let the reader decide for themselves. I didn't tell them what to believe. I said, okay, here's the evidence. Actually, what I did, this was really, I think it was effective. It was one of my shining moments, okay? In order to get this past, okay, this is what I did. I put it on a spectrum of opinion, okay? And I laid out 5 specific viewpoints. Absolutely not. He was not a polygamist. All the way over to the other end of the spectrum, absolutely he was an author and initiator of it. And then all the arguments, and I tried to write as effectively and as completely as I possibly could on each position. And then I said, okay, reader, so many words, you make the decision. Okay, and that's the way I left it, and that's to me, that's the way it should be approached. You weigh the evidence, the historical verified evidence, with the issue, and make your determination. It's not a matter of faith that Joseph Smith Jr. had 45 wives or 33 wives. That's all a matter of faith, and that's all a matter of. Let me back that up. It's a faithful view, one way or the other. Your faith says yes, absolutely faith. There are those when my say no, my faith does not allow me to believe that. As historian, I'm saying, look, it shouldn't be a matter of faith. Your faith is in Jesus Christ, by golly, not in Joseph Smith Jr. Give me a break. Excuse me, I didn't mean to. You can edit that. Okay. It gets frustrating. It gets frustrating.
Oh, I agree. Because I'm so frustrated. I don't understand why it seems like it's a growing movement in my church, and I'm just like, why?
Okay, so
there's an anti-intellectual, anti-scholar view right now on a lot of topics, not just this. It drives me crazy.
Okay, so we can conclude with this story. In 2011, the Newsweek in New York City wanted to interview our church leadership on the issue of polygamy.
Oh,
okay. So our public relations folks said, sure, come on out. So they sent out a woman by the name of, can't even remember her name now. It'll come to me. Really nice person, young person. I think she was probably in her early 30s, late 20s, and full of questions. and since it was a historical issue, she ended up in my office. Okay. And so it was a 2-hour interview. We even went to lunch together. Okay, 2-hour interview. And eventually you knew it was going to come up. Does your church believe that Joseph Smith was a polygamist? So I did my spectrum of opinion explanation, right? And she took very good, and as a matter of fact, even tape recorded it. And then she left my office and went and interviewed Wallace B. Smith. And I don't know anything about that interview, but anyway, they left mine. Well,
he was the prophet.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. At the time, or was he retired?
He was retired at that point. Okay. So, but he still had an office up in the First Presidency as just kind of a place where he went. Okay. So that was in like February of 2011. The article came out in October issue of Newsweek. Okay. So what did this reporter write? This is Mark Scherer, Dr. Mark Scherer, World Church historian, said that Joseph Smith Jr. was the author and first practitioner of polygamy. Okay? And of course, she didn't explain it. It was in the spectrum of opinion, right? So she only said, this is what first. Well, I did make the statement that some viewed polygamy as priesthood abuse. Because that was one of the frameworks for that on that very end. Sure as the world, she said, and Scherer says that Joseph Smith Jr.'s polygamy activities were priesthood abuse. Oh, ministerial abuse. That's what it was. Ministerial abuse.
Oh. This is why we do podcasts. We don't.
Lord, have
take
mercy.
Stuff out of context.
when it hit the fan, you could see Newsweek evidently was published in California first, because the letters were coming in all the way across the United States. The phone calls eventually got to the East Coast. So anyway, the point is, that's not. Yes, I should. Yes, that's what I said. Absolutely, that's what I said. I couldn't deny it, because in the explanation of the viewpoint to the very far end is that he did in fact commit ministerial abuse. But that's the viewpoint of those who view it. Does that make sense at all? Mm-hmm. Am I making any sense at all? Mm-hmm. Because I also said no, he was exonerated. Joseph would never do that. Emma said he would in 1879. She didn't write that. So anyway, leave it to Scherer to get himself in hot water. So, you might know. Okay. Right.
I know we need to move on to the next book, but I just have one more question.
Go for
in this first time period. Another developing controversy that I really don't understand in my church has recently been, did Joseph use the Seer Stone?
Yes.
Or the Urim and Thummim to translate the Book of Mormon? Do you have an opinion on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, the historical record shows both.
That's what Richard Bushman says, right?
Sorry?
Richard Bushman says that.
Yes. He used the hat and the stones, okay? But Oliver Cowdery wrote also that part of the communication, the plates were never even there. I mean, the golden plates, there's no hat in the hand, no material cultural aid. That's artifact, no artifactual aid. He was just across the table like you and me. Well, so what's the answer to the question? I think Bushman's right. Both. If it's inspiration, if he's inspired in his own mind, if he's inspired to communicate, does he need artifactual assistance? Maybe. But on the other hand, I don't know, maybe not. I mean, maybe he doesn't need it. So what's my viewpoint on the use? Seer stones are, lots of people had seer stones, not just Joseph Jr., you know that.
Mm-hmm.
It was a rather common, I wouldn't say common, because a lot of people scoffed at it, particularly in the higher education institutions. But in frontier, it was very much in use. His next door neighbors had used seer stones. There was a woman who lived across the Virginia split rail fence who had a seer. Well, she was the one who used the stones to try to locate the place. You know the story.
Mm-hmm.
In the barn.
Mm-hmm.
Under the grain crops, and he had just taken them out and moved them. These people are, the idea of using the stones was very cultural at the time, and it shouldn't surprise anyone. It doesn't surprise me. It shouldn't surprise anyone that Joseph Smith would embrace that. I mean, that was his style. That was his modus operandi, and the believers at the time embrace it. He used the stones to try to find the treasures. You know that story.
In Salem, is that what you're talking about?
Absolutely. I mean, in the basement. Yeah, absolutely. Remember, he was supposed to go to, well, several of them did. Rigdon was there.
Talk to you for hours, I can tell.
Yeah. And this was where he's supposed to find this wonderful treasure.
Mm-hmm.
And that was going to finance the church, which was very important. I mean, very important. Well, but having said that, I don't scoff because that is early 21st century mindset, imposing judgment on an early 19th century people. And I think it's very inappropriate to do so. Any more than 200 years into the future, those people back in 2023 believed what? They what? That's them imposing judgment on us, which shame on them. Likewise, shame on us, okay, for taking to task Joseph Smith Jr. for using a seer stone. We have seer stones. You can ask up in the archives. There are two seer stones.
Your church has two?
Yes, two.
Because I think we've got at least two. The white stone and the brown stone.
Well, Joseph Smith Jr. gave seer stones to lots of people among the leadership. Grant McMurray, President McMurray, in 1996, in his inaugural address to the 96th World Conference, challenged people to believe. His aspirations for the church was not to have a church, to be a church of people with a prophet. He wanted to call the people to be a prophetic people. What a wonderful, wonderful expression, okay? Joseph Smith Jr. gave seer stones and called them to be a prophetic people. Grant McMurray was a wonderful church historian.
Yeah.
Assistant historian.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Oh, yeah.
Before he was prophet?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
He moved from assistant historian to world church secretary, counselor in the presidency, and then prophet president.
Oh, okay.
So it was he was a classmate at Graceland.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, history major.
Wow.
He was in his master's degree program when I was there in 1996.
UMKC?
UMKC. Okay.
So two things on that and then we'll move on to the next book. The first one is, I want to make sure I'm clear on this. my understanding is Richard Bushman said that Joseph used the Urim and Thummim for the last 116 pages. And then when after they were lost, he found them cumbersome to use, and then he used the Seer Stone. Is that your understanding as well?
I would defer to Richard Bushman. He's done the best research on that.
Now, the other statement that you said was that really caught my attention. There's a new book out by Jonathan Neville and Jim Lucas, and I've read chapter 1 so far, and because they're making the case that they almost paint, I don't want to say David Whitmer is a bad guy, but as an antagonist toward the church, because he kind of left and had a falling out. But they say that Joseph and Oliver always said that Joseph used the Seer Stone. Now, you just said that Oliver made a statement, Joseph and Oliver always said Joseph used the Urim and Thummim. You just said that Oliver used a Seer Stone.
Okay.
And so do you have any backup for that?
Sure. Lucy Mack Smith is the one that referred. The problem is that they're using the Old Testament Urim and Thummim expression to describe lots of different things.
Including the Seer Stone.
Including the breastplates.
Okay.
As part of the Urim and Thummim. So the Urim and Thummim is an expression, in my mind, you're asking me for my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
The Urim and Thummim is an expression of artifactual use to achieve the divine mind. I'll say it again. It's artifactual use. That is physical. It's physical. It's a physical attempt. It's a physical aid to achieve the divine mind. Okay. So if the breastplate for Lucy Mack Smith was the Urim and Thummim, or later if Joseph III or Joseph Jr. says, well, I used the Urim and Thummim, and he's making reference to the Seer Stones. To me, they're both right if you understand it as an artifactual aid to achieve the divine mind. Does that make?
I think so. I just know. I just listened to Jim and Jonathan talk about this. They're making a very strong case that because I think that has been a belief is that Urim and Thummim could refer to Seer Stones, and they're like, no, it does not.
Yeah.
But you're saying that it could.
Sure,
and
could.
Do you have anything where Oliver was referring to a Seer Stone for the translation of the Book of Mormon? I mean, if you want to look it up. Did he
write that? Did he write that in the Messenger and Advocate explanation? Rick, it's just been too many years. Yeah. I can't remember. I suppose I could look it up.
Okay, well, I'll get your email and we'll check it later.
Yeah. But there were times, Bushman is right, there were times when he didn't use the Seer Stone to interpret the plates, right?
Right.
The plates were, in some cases, the plates were not even there. I mean, not even, they were not on the table, and yet here he's explaining, I don't know what it was, 3rd Nephi or 4th Nephi, whatever book he was describing. He was not turning the gold leaf pages, and I hope that doesn't dash your understanding.
It doesn't dash mine, but it would dash Jonathan and Jim's, I think. Well, they're making a strong case, and there's some others.
If in your mind it's a strong case,
well, and when I say strong,
case.
I mean an emotionally strong case, not
wonderful. That's
not
wonderful.
Historically strong.
Again, Rick, who am I to call that into question? I would not want to do that. I would not want anything I say to be considered a challenge to your beliefs or an attempt to try to dissuade you from believing anything that's part of your faith. I mean, that's part of who you are. And woe be unto me.
I think he used a Seer Stone personally, but
fantastic. then write it down. Go for it. I believe he did too, because the historical record does describe him using his hat. How about this?
Okay.
This goes back to the Palmyra days. Okay. And several people are sitting on, according to the explanation, the way Lucy explained it, is that they're sitting on a fence rail. Well, so they're by a fence. They're cutting, or they're just solving the problems of the world. One of them has a valuable pin. Okay. He's also one of the witnesses of the book. Wait. So he's picking his teeth as they're talking. All of a sudden, oh my goodness, he drops his pin with that precious gem on the end of it. Okay, so they're all scrambling around looking for it, and it's a needle in a haystack, and they can't find it.
So P-I-N or P-E-N?
P-I-N.
Okay.
I think my guess, it was probably a stick pin of sorts.
For his tie or something?
Yeah. Martin Harris is the guy I'm talking about. Okay. So Harris jumps down, and they're all scrambling, trying to find it. They can't. Oh my gosh, he's lost this valuable pin. Who happens to be sauntering towards them? It's Joseph Jr.
With a Seer Stone.
And you know the story. Martin Harris goes, Joseph, come here. We've lost this terrible pin. Help us find. Use your stone. He makes reference. Use your stone and help us find it. Now, according to the story, Joseph gets it out, and Harris explains that, well, actually Lucy does, that the hat, he could not see. It was like he reached down and picked up his pen.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now explain that. I mean, it's the problem is Lucy Mack Smith. So that, but anyway, be that as it may, that's the use of the stone.
Mm-hmm.
It's an ocular device, ocular assistant. Okay. You ever looked through a Seer Stone?
I have not.
Oh, I have. I looked through David Whitmer's stone.
Oh, really? Do you have that in the church possession?
Yeah, it's believed to be David Whitmer's. It came in 1903 to our church when they sold the manuscript, the Book of Mormon manuscript, out of the Whitmer family.
Huh.
And included was a chest, beautiful chest, leather type with nice, and inside was the manuscript, and with the manuscript were these Seer Stones, two of them. One was David Whitmer's, believed. I use the word believed because the authentication is there's no trail that convinces me that it was David Whitmer's stone. So I use the word believed to be David Whitmer's stone. Okay, I looked in it. It's got two holes. Actually, it's got three. It's got two holes there. And when you look through it, and when I look at you, this is what happens. Okay, and then when you bring it back, there's two holes. But when you look through it, that's exactly what happens.
Okay.
My belief, do I know? Just my speculation, bold, sheer speculation, is that they believed that perhaps that was the portal of looking from the divine, or how about this user expression, to see through the veil.
Oh, wow.
To see through the veil. When those two, they knew there were two. But when this happened, Then
There's only one hole.
there's one hole.
Okay. Very cool.
My story is about Seer Stones.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Mark Scherer, former Community of Christ Church historian. You know, a lot of us don't know really what happened to Joseph Smith's family after Joseph died. Turns out that Emma remarried a guy named Louis Bideman.
Bideman saw her and kind of forgot himself, ducked under a clothesline, and didn't make it.
Uh-oh.
Off came the hat, off came the toupee, and both Emma and Joseph III saw him kind of collect himself, like he got low bridged with his clothesline.
Oh, no.
And he quickly put his hat on and put his hair on and put his hat on and continued on and just had, like nothing happened, happy as a lark, And what's so significant about that story is it says a lot about Louis Bideman.
Mm-hmm.
He is a man who is confident of himself, that he's willing to laugh at something like that when he could have been embarrassed. And like I would have been, oh my gosh, mortified.
Yeah.
He just kind of passed it off. And I mean, there's Emma. Hi, Emma, And eventually, as you point out, they got married on Joseph's birthday.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, you can hear the audio only at patreon.com/gospeltangents. For just $5 a month, you can hear the entire interview with no interruptions. If you want to watch the entire video for just $8 a month, you can also sign up at Patreon or on youtube.com/gospeltangents and just subscribe here. You can watch the entire video uncut before everybody else. Also, if you'd like to continue to support Gospel Tangents, you can either sign up for our $10 or $20 memberships, or you can get some cool gear like this hat. I've got the coffee mugs like this here. We've got sweatshirts and t-shirts, and I'm even thinking about ties. Somebody said they wanted a tie, so I'll see if I can get that on my store. So go to gospeltangents.com store, and you can get some Gospel Tangents gear. So you don't want to miss that. So anyway, thanks for listening. If you'd like to check out some of our other videos, check out here.